I became a communications consultant and a business owner. And it's really funny because I was trying to figure out during that time in my life, um, what did I actually want to do? And I felt like I was just being pulled along mostly, that any opportunity that popped up, I was jumping on it. And I just didn't really have a sense of what I actually wanted to do and where I could aggregate all the skills and areas of expertise that I had accumulated. And so at that time, I sought out a career and life coach. And honest to goodness, she was transformational for me because
How old were you then?
I was probably, let me see, maybe in my mid 40s,
Okay.
early 50s, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just felt like, as I said, I felt like I was just being pulled along in whatever opportunity popped up. And I got this sense that, or I felt this pull toward doing something different. And so I got this career and life coach and she was very, very instrumental in helping me think about what I really wanted to do and to being able to take charge rather than being pulled along in my career. And, look, I was making a lot of money. I was feeling pretty good about myself. I just felt this need to do something different. And so over the course of about a year and a half, she worked with me every other week. And we dug into who was Millree Williams? Why was he feeling this sort of wanderlust, and how I could sort of take more control over my life. I was doing a whole bunch of executive positioning, um, a lot of media training, all of those different kinds of things. From there, I created Willecop Consulting. That was the evolution of it. And after several years of having worked with, well, she worked with me for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And then she sort of disappeared because she said, it's time for you, Millree, to create your own herd rather than running with the pack. And that really had a big appeal to me. And that's when I created my own consulting firm. Afterward, after several years of doing that, she came back to me and she said, she was just checking in and she said, look, hey, Millree, what are you up to these days? How is the herd going? And I was, saying to her, hey, everything's going really well. Um, I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. I feel like I'm contributing in many different ways. And so here's what she said to me. She said, Millree, you should be a coach. And that was like the farthest thing from my mind. I said, Kelly, you are great as a coach. You have been pivotal in my life. But I am not a coach. I'm a communications person. That is my jam. I love communications work. And she said, you need to be a coach. And she said, you have all the skills, you're already mentoring, you're already a very supportive person, you're already very, very curious about life and all the things that revolve around that. She said, you're a great listener and you're non-judgmental. And honest to goodness, for about 6 months, every week, she called me and texted me from New Zealand. And she literally harassed me into becoming a coach. She, seriously, she said, this was the pivotal piece. She said, even if you don't become a coach, she said, but I guarantee you will. But she says, even if you don't, you're going to get a new set of skills that you'll be able to use anywhere. And she said, I guarantee you that once you've gone through training, you will not look back. And she was absolutely right. I went through my initial coach training. I got my certification, and I immediately started thinking, how can I apply these skills to things that people are struggling with. And so I expanded my consultancy to become Willecop Consulting and Coaching. And then the pandemic hit just a year or so after I got my coaching certification. And so all of the avenues that I thought would be open to me, presenting at conferences, going to different offices and doing training and that kind of thing, all of those doors were closed to me because, nothing was really happening in terms of people being social and public and in the same place. So I got invited to present to an organization 40 plus of Greater Washington. And they want, like you guys, they were doing everything virtually. And so I did an online presentation to them about the importance of active listening and career change and all of those different kinds of things and the ways you can use various coaching skills and coaching techniques as you are interviewing and how to take charge of an interview so that you are not the recipient, but you are the suitor. I did that. And by the way, since that time, I have now become chair of 40 Plus of Greater Washington. And at a certain point, my whole niche evolved into working with late career professionals who were making a transition. And in my role and my responsibility with 40 plus of Greater Washington, I started seeing that people had a need, that they were in this transitional period in their lives where they were struggling to hold on to jobs. They were not being uh, properly recognized for their skills in a changing workplace. And that really sort of led me to thinking about how can I serve this particular group of people? So that became a real passion of mine. And so I really started focusing on coaching, mentoring that particular demographic. And that just naturally led me to retirement coaching because there is an intersection there, as you might imagine, of people who are late career trying to figure out what's next. Should they go out and really aggressively look for their next job? Should they consider early retirement? And all of those issues that were attendant to that particular time in their lives. So I went out, I studied retirement life coaching, and this is not financial. Most people at this age have figured out what they're going to be doing financially. But for me, the challenge was, and what I heard all the time was, okay, I've got my finances in place or I have a plan, but what am I going to do between 7 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock in the evening? What are those moments in my life going to be like? Who am I now in this retirement phase of my life? And so many people were approaching early retirement, retirement, and even in retirement with struggles around identity, boredom, trying to figure out what's next for themselves, how to turn their moments of retirement into moments of excitement and fulfillment. And that really sort of inspired me. So, as I said, I went out and got training as a retirement life coach. And I've just like never looked back since then. And what my then coach recommended was that I get find a program that was accredited by the International Coaching Federation, which is the global accrediting organization for recognized coaches. So I went into the ICF and I started searching around for programs. I found a program, the Coach Training Alliance, which is in Oregon. And I did the online courses and the workshops and the training. And that really involved learning how to listen in a way that is you can really understand what people are actually saying, as opposed to just trying to get to the next place in the conversation. Um, Learning how to find the moments in those conversations where where a light bulb goes off, and being able to understand when that light bulb goes off and taking advantage, learning how to leverage that moment of that epiphany moment for clients. And then all of the various other skills that go along with it. And then actually doing the training and um, getting the hours in that were required to become certified.
Millree, you mentioned a word there, listening. And I've found in 25 years of dealing with wounded veterans now, listening is such a key word. Uh, all too many people, especially around Washington, D.C., think they're listening but don't listen. But you got to learn to listen to understand what people are trying to explain about their needs and desires. And I think it's a key ingredient in the coaching process.
I think you're absolutely right, Bob. It's really interesting. Lots of coaches, and even I, when I was a newly minted coach, wanted to talk about what I did for a living, why it was important. And I was not really tuned into, at that moment, listening, because people don't hire coaches because of the coaching. They hire coaches to solve a problem. They're looking for a new job. They've not had very much success. They're approaching retirement and they've got some anxiety. They're in retirement, they're bored, or they are not having a fulfilling moment. You find these people, they find you, and they invite you into their lives to help them solve a problem. And that's been the biggest epiphany that I've had as a coach, listening and trying to figure out what that is that they're struggling with.
But what do you tell people who don't know what their passion is, or if it's just not obvious?
The first thing I would ask people to think about is, what are they most curious about? Where do you get your inspiration? What kinds of things really attract you? And I think if they start thinking about it that way and thinking about what they're good at and combining that with their own curiosity, what do you like learning? What do you like doing? What kinds of things do you think about in your idle time? That typically will lead to them discovering or evolving into what their passion is going to be. I know a guy who is, for example, who is an engineer, a good friend of mine who was in the engineering school at University of Maryland, where I worked for quite a number of years. And he had a certain mindset about engineering. As you know, engineers are thinking goal oriented. What is the process? How do you get from point A to point B? And he had a very interesting curiosity around playing the banjo. I know it's crazy, right? I mean, talking to this guy, you would never have thought that he had this sort of deep desire. And we had these conversations for a number of years, just as friends. And this is before I was coaching. And he got involved in learning how to actually play the banjo. He started doing some gig work, on a Friday night at a local club. And honest to goodness, Tom, this guy, if you saw him performing at a local club, you would have no idea that he was an engineer, because he's so passionate about, playing the banjo. And no one would associate that particular path, that avocation for him, with his full-time gig, which is engineering.